Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Vince, and I've been doing admissions since 1989 and college counseling since 1998 in California.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, Vince and I will discuss an article that appeared in the New York Times by Stephanie Saul on December 17th entitled, Suit Accuses Georgetown, Penn, and MIT of Admissions Based on Wealth. Our question from a listener comes from Becky. She's a college counselor in California, and she wants to know, why have so few colleges pull out of U.S. News and World Report after they pulled out of the law school rankings? Whatever happened with that? Well, Hillary works in admissions at one of those schools that did pull out of U.S. News and World Report, Colorado College. So Hillary will take the lead on answering that question. Our interview is with Rob Franek, the editor-in-chief of the Princeton Review. We are looking at what you can learn about the culture of a college from the 168,000 interviews that Princeton Review did on college campuses last year. And Kevin Newton is back. He'll be doing a 4-part series with us on safe colleges overseas in our college spotlight. Good morning, friends. Friends, there's just far too much college admissions news out there breaking literally every day for us to cover everything on every topic, even with 2 episodes a week. I literally feel we would need a daily episode, and I'm still not sure we could do it. And we believe the questions that you send in are actually more important than the topics that we select for our articles. But there are some really newsworthy things happening all the time in the world of college admissions and college, and we try to share these significant stories through our monthly Your College Bound Kid newsletter. If you go to yourcollegeboundkid.com and sign up for our free newsletter, our January newsletter is going to go out on the 20th of January or Monday. And I just want to share with you some of the articles that are not behind a paywall that we provide links to in that newsletter that we really recommend you read. So there's an article called Buckle Up. It's going to be a really wild ride. It looks at changes happening in college admissions in 2025. There's another article that talks about what schools are transfer friendly. If it just works out that you didn't end up at a place you were pleased with, what are some places that are very transfer friendly? You know, there's been a lot of talk about how bad Trump is going to be for higher ed. Well, there's an article that says colleges might see less red tape under Trump, which takes a contrarian view. There's another article on the latest Common App trends. What can you learn? Because the Common App has access to just millions of applications, right? So they can see a lot of trends. And it looks at where does it look like the future is going based on the trends from the Common App. There's another article, and this is more of an opinion piece, but the FAFSA was pretty degraded and denigrated last year for just the fiasco in the rollout. But things are really smooth so far. And there's an article that said, how did the FAFSA get back on track? There's another article, and this is actually an interesting not debate, but it's an interview with 2 leaders in the field. Christoph Gutentag, who's on our Monday interviews for the next really four weeks, and Rob Massa, former VP of Enrollment at Dickinson. And they make the case for early decision is not just for wealthy students, and they talk about why ED is on the rise. I don't agree with everything in that article, but I agree with most of it, not all of it. But we want to bring you different opinions, not just the opinions of the co-hosts. So that's a good one worth reading. And then there's another really good article that, I could see us coming back and really maybe doing this for it in the news, but it looks at UT Austin's auto admit And that's what they began 30 years ago in response to affirmative action being shut down, where they admitted the top 10% of their class and then became the top 6% of the class. And next year it goes to the top 5% of the class. But the article looks at how much more selective it's made UT Austin, and it looks at the frustrations that people in Texas are experiencing with the auto admit. It's a really good article. It's a pretty thorough article. I really like it a lot. If you have any interest in Texas admissions, I'd strongly recommend you read it. So those are a few articles that we'll have links for if you get the newsletter delivered straight into your email inbox. And January's newsletter will go out on January 20th. And friends, before you hear Vince and I in our conversation today, there was one more SpeakPipe message that came in, sort of a tribute to episode 500. I want to play it. The reason I want to play it is because I think that a lot of you are listeners on that episode 500, but I really want to thank all of the co-hosts who work tirelessly, do research, and give of their time so that they can help you. And this message from Matt from Florida, I really appreciate it because he mentions every co-host by name. So you'll hear that, and then it'll be Vince and I talking about this major lawsuit that's being enacted against wealthy colleges.
This is Matt in Miami. Greetings, Mark, Lisa, Andy, Hillary, Susan, Vince, Julia, Linda, Kevin, and everyone else I forgot to mention. Congratulations on your 500th episode. My daughter is already halfway through her first year at university, and a testament to your skill and to the quality of your work is that I still listen to every episode. There's no one thing that I can think of, but the variety and volume of quality content that you put out consistently is really what keeps me coming back, and is the X factor to your program is that you keep things very interesting. I've learned so much from very different topics throughout the couple of years I've been listening, and your drive, your passion comes through in every episode. I've shared the program with many people who I think can use it and will continue to do so. Thank you very much for what you do, and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Vince, Happy New Year!
Happy New Year. How are you?
I'm fantastic. A lot of really good stuff happening. I'm kind of excited, doing well with the health. A lot of good stuff happening over here. Excited about 2025. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, we're hoping, 2025 would launch a little better than 2024, but here in LA, we're under siege here. I've never seen anything like it. I would say, Mark,
I'm worried, Vince.
What do you mean?
For LA.
Yes.
I know you have it. I have it. I have several people that had to, evacuate.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you a really quick story, and then I want to get your feedback because you're there front and center. So my oldest daughter, Karis, on day one at Davidson, she met, other than Joy, like her total bestie. Like they are inseparable. It's a New York student, boarding school student, came down to Davidson. They met on day one, and they're like super, super close. And so they spend lots of time together. To make a long story short, she's a screenwriter in LA. She had just spent 7 days with Karis, both in New York, and then they went down to Durham.
Wow. She
left Durham to go back to LA on January 3rd. She's back in Durham with Karis and Joy right now for like the foreseeable future because of the air quality. First thing she had to do was evacuate to an Airbnb.
Mm-hmm.
Then the air quality was so bad, she's like, I can't breathe this. So, and she does have a job where she can work from home.
What part of LA?
I should know that, but I don't.
It sounds, well, if it's the air quality, it'd have to be either Pasadena, Altadena, or the West Side. That's terrible.
But Vince, you and I know someone in Santa Monica that's out.
That's
somebody else in Santa Monica that's not out.
Yeah, that's the West Side. It depends. She may have, some asthma or special, unique unique situation. But I would say somewhere between 60 and 70% of my either former clients or current clients evacuated or lost their homes. I think I know at least 30 people who lost their homes. 30.
You know why that doesn't surprise me? So Karis, she's a Spanish tutor, you know that.
Yeah.
So she works for an IEC in LA. Like she freelances, right? So she like works for me, she works for this person, she works for her own people. But she works for an IEC in LA who told her that she knows 40 people that are her clients, past or present, that have lost their homes.
Yeah.
So there's 40 from her and 30 from you. That's 70. And we're not talking about evacuating. We're talking about losing their homes.
Mm-hmm. One of my writing people, my closest friend Dave. I just, yeah, it's tough.
Well, let's start with you. Like, do you feel, I know you're in the flats, so are you like just totally safe, or is it, hey, the wind could blow any direction, any time and come our way kind of thing?
I'm totally safe. The part of LA that I'm in is not, I mean, it would have to be remarkable circumstances there was a fire, I don't know, probably 3 miles away, but it would have to jump over the 405 and then start to rip through the neighborhood. And that's still, that would be really unusual. So yeah. So, and what's also unusual is smoke wise, just because of where we're situated, it was pretty clear. Like the skies were clear last year when there were fires. That was over in Silmar off the 118. That was much worse for me in terms of air quality. It was constant, smelled like smoke all the time. I don't have this past week. I haven't had any of that.
Wow. I mean, what's the solution?
There's going to have to be multiple solutions. I mean, they're going to have to. There's so much to be done, both in Altadena and the West Side and the Palisades, that it's hopefully they have a really coordinated plan, but it's going to take a long time. Like if you read the paper, houses, they're being bought up just because people realize it's probably going to take 2 to 5 years to get back into their house if they rebuild.
Goodness. I know UCLA's evacuated. I know a couple of people there that are that are out, and that they're not that far from Palisades, right? But they're safe.
No, because the way the winds were blowing, that Palisades fire is barely contained. It's only like 13 to 15% contained, and it was growing this weekend over the Santa Monica Mountains, and then that attacks Encino, Sherman Oaks, Woodland Hills, Tarzana. Tonight, we're supposed to get horrible winds, like not like they were last week, but maybe 20 miles slower than last week. But those winds last week, I've never seen anything like that.
Oh my goodness.
And
Yeah.
you knew as soon as it starts to kick up, that there would be some fire, but I don't think anyone imagined. You had such little time to evacuate. My friend Dave, they get a thing on their phone, and they've evacuated before. It's never gone down that far down the foothills in Altadena. And then finally the alert is evacuate, and that's all you get. Evacuate.
Wow.
And it just pops up. And he thought, okay, we'll be back tomorrow. So you don't really, I mean, he did get some things that he thought were important, but he definitely said that if he was to do this again, he would have everything that he wanted to go in one place and take that.
Jeez.
Because he just, they don't have anything.
Goodness. I just can't even imagine. Oh
And
my goodness.
hundreds of people without a home, and there's no
I mean,
community.
that your area already had a housing shortage before this.
Mm-hmm.
What's it going to be like now? And what's that going to do to costs of real estate and everything?
Yes, costs of real estate.
It's going to be like, you're going to be like Berkeley.
Oh no. The other thing they have to figure out, I have to say, we were in some ways really lucky and blessed, but there's not, when you're on the west side and you're somewhere off of Sunset, it if you have a client on Sunset and you have to go to their house, you basically see one or two students that day, because going down Sunset on, a normal day without a fire is just dead stop for at least an hour. So I don't know how those people got out in time.
Talk to me a bit about the colleges. So is LMU kind of safer in the part of where they're at? I followed up with a few people there, and they seem to
Yes,
not be
yes.
reacting the same way some other people are.
It's up on a plateau, so it would
Yeah,
have to, down in the marina, which there's lots of water, and it's like a kind of a marsh, so it would it would be, although, LA hasn't had rain in 8 months, so it's
geez.
it's very dry. So LMU is good. There's
What about
possibility.
Pepperdine?
Pepperdine at one point really looked like it
Because
was going
that's
to burn.
Malibu.
It looked like it was going to burn down. It really did.
Yeah, that
It
was the
really did.
first school that I thought of.
Pepperdine, and the Palisades, that school is gone. Most of it is gone.
Geez.
The elementary schools are gone. The churches are gone. Where you shop is gone. There's nothing in the Palisades. Nothing. It looks like a bomb went off.
Wow. What about USC? Are they safe?
You're like me. There, it's interesting. There's certain parts of LA where there's people are generally, sort of middle to lower income, and because you're not on a hill, you're not on a mountain, you're in the flats, nothing's going to happen to to USC. They were in the line of fire when they had the riots, and that
Yeah.
was close, but they shut that campus down, and it was, like Fort
Yeah,
Knox.
the darn thing is a fortress now. I
Yeah.
mean, goodness. When I was there, I've never gone to a school that made it that hard to get into the campus.
Well, after October 7th, when they started to get all the protests,
Hmm.
USC was pretty easy to get onto, I have to say. But now, no. Mm-mm. Mm-mm. There won't be any protests about October 7th on the USC campus anymore.
You shut that bad boy down. Well, I'm constantly thinking about it. I was gonna say something about it on episode 500, but I knew I was coming on with you for 501, and I'm like, you're right there, and you could give us kind of an insider's view of what's happening.
Yeah, it's just everyone has been impacted. One of the people that I work with, they have 7 people at their house right now, and
Yeah,
nobody knows when they're going to leave because there's nowhere to go.
yeah,
Now, if you have insurance, my friend Dave said that I think he is State Farm. He gets 60,000 for living. So, and he was lucky because he called right after the next day, and they're going to cut a check. He's got pictures. Luckily has a floor plan. Like certain things that a lot of people who just have grown up in their home for a long time, they don't have those things. They don't have like pictures of what was there or a floor plan or
geez.
any of that.
Oh, I can't imagine. Well, friends, pray for Los Angeles and pray also for Vince. Vince has hip surgery on Thursday, which is when this is going live. And I'm not just putting his business out there. He gave me permission to
Uh,
share that with you.
Thank
And
you.
so it's hip replacement surgery, right,
Yeah.
Vince?
Yes. Yes.
That's not a joke.
It's not
I think of you as Mr. Treadmill, Mr. Fitness Guy. When did this pain start inflicting you?
last February. And, I
Wow.
thought I pulled something, and
Hmm.
progressively, I did all the things that I would normally do. And it just, by June, I was, limping. I couldn't lift my leg to turn it to get outside of the car. Um, so my friend who's a PT person, he said, "Oh, wow, you really have a distinct limp there." So we finally got to the MRI, and there's just no cartilage there, nothing. It's
Wow.
just bone on bone, bone spurs.
Jeez.
I think it's like, Mark, if you have a really bad toothache all the time,
Oh,
that's what
jeez.
it's like.
Oh, goodness. I get that. Why do dentists make the big bucks? Because when you've had that, like, you got to fix it. Like, they can almost name their price. Like, you're going to find a way to to get rid of that.
Yes, it's a yeah. If I there's been numerous times I said if we could take this leg off, I would take it off.
Wow. Well, I've always wondered, like when people have things like hip replacements or knee replacement, it feels so drastic to me. And I've always said, man, it must have had to be really bad to go and do a knee or a hip or something like that.
Yes, but I have a great doctor. A lot of people here in LA have seen him. He's sort of a savant, he's a machine. And everyone I've talked to who's, when I say his name, they get excited. He does such a fantastic job. So,
So you're expecting pretty much a full recovery from what you know
yes,
of him?
yes. And I talked to my brother-in-law today and he was like, "Oh, Vince, you're going to wake up from the surgery and that pain is gone and you'll remember." Like there was a time, Mark,
Yeah.
one of the doctors gave me this like round of steroids and my leg felt normal. And I was like, "Oh my God, this is what it's like to feel normal." And that feeling was incredible because I literally had forgotten what it was like to not feel constant pain.
Wow. Well, admire your optimism, and we'll be lifting you up, my friend. I'll
Thank
I'll,
you so
follow
much.
I'll follow up with you. Do you? How's it work? I don't know anything about hip surgery. Like, how long are you in there?
So you're in there, they have you scheduled for 2 hours, but it's about an hour. They have a new type of way that they do it. They used to go back from behind, but now they do it anterior, and that saves them from having to cut all these muscles to get to it.
Sheesh.
So
Wow.
when they go through the front now, they kind of have to stretch things around the muscle because they basically cut the top of your leg bone off at the top, is my
Sheesh.
understanding, and replace it with some
Good
metal
thing you're
thing.
knocked out.
Yeah, and my brother-in-law said that it was the pain really comes from them stretching your muscle so they can get the top of your hip bone chopped off.
So, I mean, is the recovery in the hospital?
I have one night stay,
That's it.
and
Wow.
that's optional, but I thought it was wise to give, you want to make sure you're ready to go. And when you
Yeah.
stay overnight, they make sure you can't leave until you have to go through physical rehab. They have you walking probably within 3 or 4 hours of the surgery.
Gee.
They teach you how to get up. They teach you how to get out of bed. They teach you all these exercises. Um, I have a PT appointment that following Tuesday.
Hmm.
So I'm just going to get there and
Wow.
listen.
Well, there's a lot going on between all the, trauma around you with 30 people losing their houses and then what you have going on in your own personal health journey. So, stay positive.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm
Yeah.
trying. This is a nice break. This week is a little bit lighter because I think USC comes out Friday. So I'll be, you know, on pain medication by that point. I think.
I have really, really noticed the workload drop off, since all of the 2025s for the most part are all in,
Mhm.
you know. I mean, I would have days before that I'd have 6 to 8 30-minute meetings, and then now it's been more like two or three for me, maybe four,
That's like
maybe
heaven to
four.
me. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's interesting though, because I feel like I'm sort of in the middle, because I have
Hmm.
those defer kids, like we got to write that now, and
Oh,
then I have still people applying, like USC is due the 15th, but they come out Friday, is what the kids told me. Michigan and Wisconsin and UT, all these schools are coming, and I am a little bummed that it's delayed because if I'd had it today, then I
yeah.
probably
Vince
would
was
be.
supposed to have his operation today. That's what he's referring to. It got pushed from Vince and I are sitting here recording this on Monday the 13th. You guys will see this on Thursday the 16th. So this one's going fresh live right away for you. Yeah.
Yes. So if I'd had it today, then I'd probably be in better shape. But everyone knows, so it's not going to be. They're not going to. If they don't hear from me, they know it's like he's on pain medication. But I'm just planning to get moving as soon as I can. That's what they say. You got to get that thing moving.
Well, you've never, you've always really watched your health well. I think I've always admired you. In fact, I remember when you first started listening to our podcast way back in the day. Remember, you'd be on your treadmill. That was your
Yeah.
routine to listen on
Yes.
the treadmill. Yeah. Yeah.
I still listen, but I'm on an air bike because that's the only thing I can do to get moving because my
Sure.
brain doesn't turn on until I've done some exercise.
Well, a lot of listeners do like it when we open up our lives and they feel, sort of parasocial connection to us. But we've been chatting about 18 minutes. Let's get to
Okay.
our content. So fascinating article. Vince is gonna give us a description and we'll talk about it.
All right.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
So today's article comes from the New York Times. The title of the suit accuses Georgetown, Penn, MIT of admissions based on wealth. The schools were accused of giving special treatment to wealthy students who might not otherwise been admitted. The lawsuit claims that Georgetown and 16 other schools consider applicants' family wealth and donation potential when choosing to admit. One of the things that I would say in sort of summarizing the article is that the 17 schools are very selective. So they include the University of Pennsylvania, the MIT, Notre Dame, Cornell, Johns Hopkins, and Caltech. The new motion argues that the universities were supposed to be need blind and not take into account families' income when they decided who to admit and how much financial aid to offer. The plaintiffs argued that the schools gave preference to wealthy students, so they were looking at how much they could, whether or not they could pay, and then their donor potential in a way that violated provisions of a now expired law permitting them to agree on financial aid formulas. Defendants argued that considering student wealth and admissions was not a violation of the law, which required instead universities would not discriminate against poorer students because they needed financial aid, and the plaintiffs are attempting to redefine that. So they give examples of schools that it looks like there was some preference. There's a mention of MIT, University of Pennsylvania. They used to designate students with the initials BSI, bona fide special interest. And those students had a dramatically higher rate of admission than other applicants. Penn's former associate dean of admissions, Sarah Haberson, testified last year in a deposition in the case that BSI tag meant that a family student was a big donor or had connections to the board. Those students were, and this is a quote, were untouchable. Ms. Haberson said they would almost get in 100% of the time. There was also a really interesting response from MIT, which issued a statement Tuesday when the lawsuit came out, denying any history of wealth favoritism in its admissions, adding that after years of discovery and millions of documents released in the case, the plaintiffs could cite only a single instance in which the recommendation of a board member helped sway the decisions for two undergraduate applicants. Contrary to what the plaintiffs claim, Kimberly Allen, an MIT representative, said the potential for gifts had no bearing on these isolated cases. And in fact, our records reflect that children of wealthy individuals routinely receive disappointing news from MIT. And then there was a very interesting discussion about Georgetown. Particular applicant met with the former president of Georgetown, at a very sort of lush meeting in Aspen. And then when questioned in the lawsuit, the reason that they gave for admitting the student was that they had overcome an obstacle, and the obstacle that they had overcome was mentioned that the parents had a pretty difficult divorce. So this all stems from, there was a time where 17, 18 schools were part of a group that would overlook financial aid information, and they would make sort of the same decision on financial aid, and that people felt that was bias, and so that 10 of the 17 original universities that are included in this lawsuit have settled and paid $284 million to plaintiffs. A group of students who were formerly attended the universities and received financial aid. Some 200,000 students are estimated to have been affected over a period of more than 20 years. As a result, the settlements by several universities named in the case, some students who attended the schools are already eligible to apply for up to $2,000 to reimburse them for financial aid they otherwise would have received. So I think one of the things that I think our listeners should take away is that I think that if you were talk to an independent a student or a counselor who worked at an independent high school or a place where they're a public high school where most of the students are affluent, almost everybody has a story where there's a raised eyebrow. Like, how did this person, get get into this particularly highly selective school? Usually in terms of, there were other students who are in the high school known to be stronger, and then they maybe are waitlisted or denied. So the development piece, the potential development piece, there's a raised eyebrow. But I don't think if you've been working in admissions as long as I have, I have many stories where clearly who the family was, who the parents were, had an influence on the final decision. Sometimes it was ability to donate in the future. Some of it was based on what they had contributed to all the institutions the kids had gone to, and some of it was based on the parents. I think although this isn't a part of this lawsuit, sometimes I've seen students whose parents are famous in some way, and that seems to move the dial a little bit. So this is a really interesting case, and I can't wait to hear more about it.
Vince, Julie and I recorded a segment for the podcast 3 months ago that people haven't heard, because when I went to edit it, it turned out that Julia's audio file dropped, and it was 40-minute recording, and we have maybe 12 minutes of that recording. And we exposed all this in that conversation. No, we did. So basically one of the things that we were saying was, why is it that we come on here a lot of times and we seem a little cynical a lot of times about people's chances at getting in these super highly competitive schools? Well, the biggest reason that we emphasize is that there's a vast universe out there, and you're in your own little school enclave, but there's another, whether you believe it's 25,000 or 43,000 high schools out there. That's usually what we emphasize, right? Respect the competition. You heard me say it a million times. You think you're in a bathtub or hot tub, but you're in the ocean. And that's usually been the way that we've described it. But in that conversation, what we said was, we went into how many spots are just not available to the average person. They have no idea of this sort of secret world that goes on behind the scenes that involves wealth, celebrity, politicians, and money, alumni, donors, just other donors. And the average person, and I'm talking about like not the average person that makes like $75,000. I'm talking about the average full pay kid that could apply ED. You're just not even, these spots are off limits to you. And there's a whole world out there, and it's secret, and it's very real. And we see it. I mean, I got to be careful with how much I'm going to say here. There's somebody this year that I'm working with who is not of that level of wealth. They are like no problem to full pay to any school in the country. They could drop 100,000 like nothing, but they're not super big donor. But they are best friends with one of the richest people in this country. And this richest person in this country got word that the student did not get in their super selective ED school. And the person just went on a rampage. They said they're a wealthy person. They said, let me look up every board member on this board to see who I know for one school. And then they said, you're going to fly in my private plane down to this school because of donations that we've made at this place. And I got my connections there and I can post. I mean, there's this whole world out there that happens that people don't even know about, that are spots that take spots away. Now, I'm not trying to say it's 10% of the spots, but that's the big donor world. And then there's the people that know people of influence, and those people of influence reach out, and it doesn't always work, but it sometimes does. It's sometimes, well, this is not the right person for us to piss off, and they're advocating, and we need to pay attention to that. There's a whole world out there, and that then after I was hesitant about really running it again, because I was like, well, Gio, let's re-record the part that we lost, and I still got some of it. But then I thought, I always have this voice in the back of my ear from year one. And I was talking to this listener, and they said, I used to listen to this other podcast, but it was just stressing me out. Like your podcast, because it's not stressing me out. And then I thought, this is just going to stress people out. It's going to be like discouraging.
Yeah.
The public perception is often that getting in is meritocratic, but there's often a myth of meritocracy when you see how the extreme wealthy and powerful often pull strings to give their kids an advantage so they're not competing with average kids, even average rich kids. I think they're in trouble in this lawsuit. I think they're in trouble because they're attempting to say they don't favor big donors. And we know that they do. Like all of the defense is that we don't do that. I mean, the article talks about the Georgetown president who had 80 people.
80.
And he identified.
Every year, 80.
Every year. And then they had something called Mogul Fest.
Yes.
Where people would arrive in their private planes. And this stuff happens. This is secret world out there. And from an institution's perspective, the way they look at it, and I understand this, if somebody's going to give us $10 million, we can do a lot to advance and help a lot of kids with that.
Yeah.
Maybe they want to put in financial aid. Maybe they want to help us, upgrade our dorms, which students have been asking us to do for 20 years. So that's the argument. The problem is the lawsuit is saying you claim that you were need blind, and the way you defined need blind, this is not an exact quote, but oftentimes the way people will define need blind, I took this from Peter Van Buskirk. Peter, you went to work for Peter back in the day almost, right?
Yeah.
On the VP of Enrollment of Franklin Marshall. He says, we don't look at your wallet when we make admission decisions. That's just a simple definition. We're not looking at your wallet when we make admissions decisions. So if you're explaining need blind that way, the way the schools say, well, the intention was to say we don't discriminate against under-resourced. We don't discriminate against under-resourced. So you can be poor, you can be middle class, you can be lower middle. We're not going to hold that against you when we read your file. So that's how schools have defined it. But the lawsuit is partly coming back and saying, you've explained need blind in a way that doesn't take into account that you were looking at people's wallets. And when I look at their defense, which is we don't do that, and you and I know that they do, we've all seen it. We see it every year, at least, and it's not always, by the way, the 10 to 20, $30 million type thing. A lot of times it's the combination of the alumni, the alumni that maybe gave 20 grand 10 years in a row and was very active.
Mm-hmm.
And how they're treated different than the alumni that was a non-giver or non-involved. Like it's not always, and not even 20 grand. It might even been 5 grand. You gave 5 grand for 10 years in a row. You're an active alumni and you're very different. Your kid is getting different treatment than someone who didn't do that. But we see it all the time at these schools. Friends, this concludes part 1 of 2. We hope you join us next week for the final part.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, Hillary, I have another one of these questions that's like perfect for you.
Yeah.
In Colorado College. And so this question is from Becky, who's a school-based counselor at a private school in California. I'm going to play it and let you talk.
Hello, Mark. My name is Becky, and I'm a school-based college counselor at a private school in California. It's 2024, the end of 2024, well, November, and I was recently made aware of your podcast, so I backed up a couple of years, and I'm listening like 2 years ago at the end of 2022. At that time, a few law schools had announced pulling out of the law school rankings, and you covered that on a couple of episodes. I remember that time. I remember everybody making a huge deal out of it. Well, I think I was in the minority because I didn't think it was a huge deal. In fact, I posted on LinkedIn that, to me at least, it wasn't a huge deal until these same colleges started pulling out of the undergraduate U.S. News and World Report rankings. In essence, put your money where your mouth is. If you think it's not good for your law school, then surely it's not good for your college in general. Well, of course, nothing ever happened with that. Nobody pulled out of the undergraduate rankings just because they pulled their law school out of the rankings. And here we are 2 years later, and I'd completely forgotten about this whole thing until I started listening to your podcast from 2 years ago. So I just thought I would ring in and bring that up and see what you thought about that. Because here we are, nothing's changed. And we know that the undergraduate rankings is what has driven a lot of the craziness in our industry over the last 30 years. Maybe you've covered this on a podcast recently. I don't know. Like I said, I'm behind, but I just thought I'd bring it up just for fun to see what you thought. Thanks so much for all the good work you're doing.
Take it away.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Becky, for this question. This is a great question. In fact, it's a question I've been asking myself recently. So Colorado College did, in fact, drop out, or I would say maybe the better way to explain it is we stopped cooperating with U.S. News and World Report, which means that we just don't respond to their inquiries anymore. So that means they have old data or they have to go mine data about us, and we don't participate in their surveys where they're asking the VPs of enrollment to kind of rank schools or give responses about their opinions of different colleges. So you'll still see us obviously in the rankings because U.S. News and World Report is going to rank us whether or not we want to be involved, but we are not part of the process anymore. And I had really hoped that when we dropped out, I'm just going to use the phrase dropped out because that's the easiest way to say it. I'd really hoped that when we dropped out, that there would be some momentum behind us. I do think that takes a lot of pre-planning, and our president at the time was really just ready to go and wanted to make a big statement. I think that there perhaps is some space for someone in a leadership role at a college or university that has a lot of sort of sway or swagger to be able to start some momentum to get other colleges to drop out. But and this is just my opinion, which may be completely off, but I don't really see that happening unless multiple colleges are going to go at once, or unless one very, very highly ranked college goes first, then perhaps others would follow. I think it's really a hard thing for colleges to take on because they have so many different audiences who they have to appease, right? They've got their faculty who don't always believe that there is not correlation between testing and performance in school. They've got their boards of trustees who are often completely disconnected from the reality of how testing affects students, or how rankings affect students, right? Like these different things, these different sort of components of rankings are they take a lot of insight to be able to understand. And I don't know that the different audiences who are responsible for making decisions at universities are able to see it from a really broad place. So I think it can be hard, even when there are admission offices that want to drop out of the rankings, it can be hard for them to convince all of the different audiences that that's what needs to happen. The other thing, and I understand this part of it, that can be tough is that international students really rely on rankings even more. We think it's crazy in America, right? But international students rely even more on rankings than American students do, and sometimes for good reason. Like, I think that there are, I don't know, I don't want to spread rumors, Mark, but I've been told that there are neighborhoods in like Shanghai where it's hard to get a residence permit if you didn't graduate from a college with a certain ranking, or that there are for sure jobs abroad where having a bachelor's degree from a certain rank of an institution in the US really gives you a big foot in the door. And so, as much as in America, we say we try to encourage people not to rely on rankings, like there's a whole other world out there that we really can't impact, in terms of telling people, like, you need to not think about rankings and you need to not worry about rankings. So, it's a complicated thing. It'd be great if everyone would just all jump ship at once. And I don't really see that happening, especially with, kind of how much more competitive the landscape is getting for colleges to recruit students. What do you think, Mark?
And I agree with everything you said. Everything you said. I've changed a little bit in my thinking on this. I would admit that U.S. News and World Report has done, in some cases almost irreparable, damage to how people see colleges, sort of the commodification of colleges. And I agree with that. I look at it compared to a place like Canada, which really doesn't think the same way as you do over here. However, now that the cat is out of the bag, I don't see any way of really going back on that. And I don't see people dropping out like you did for lots of reasons. Some of it is the institutional pressures. But another reason is kind of what you said when implicitly and when you were describing, I appreciate you going and saying not participating, because if you were to drop out, the rankings don't go away. They'll just take all the data that's out there and plug you in. So a lot of people feel like, well, do I want to have a seat at the table and be able to provide it, or do I want someone to just rank me off whatever they want? So that's going to happen. Now, another reason why I don't talk about this as much, if you would have talked to me 20 years ago, 15 years ago, maybe even 10, rankings was like one of my hobby horses. I was always banging that drum. And one of the reasons why and the banging the drum, talking about, like, just how ridiculous they are. And I still feel that way. You'll still hear me say it. But one of the things that's changed in my thinking is, for one, there's so many rankings out there now that it's kind of diluted things a little bit. And, everybody's going to use them in some way, and everybody's going to say they're first in this or top 10 in this, and they're all over the place. But what I've come to realize, now this is a little bit different when it comes to ranking by programs. It's just in the literally yesterday, I had two people tell me, I was saying to one person, like, why are you like Iowa so much? Well, it's number 3 for physical therapy, And then I was talking to another student about another school. It's number 17 for, I can't remember what it was, in the same day. So there's going to be zillions of rankings out there by major, and people are going to consult them. But what I find for the most part is people are really not into rankings as much as they're into selectivity, and they actually look more at admit rate than they look at rankings. If I were to go to my students that I worked with last year, and I was to say, what's the ranking of the school that you picked? Like, most of them wouldn't know. They would know if it was ranked high, mid, or low, or something like that. But I'm telling you, people are looking at admit rates, which is why I understand. Some of you might have heard the interview we did with Andy Strickler on early decision that ran in November, throughout the whole month of November on Monday's episodes. Like, he laid out the whole process of how early decision drives down your admit rate. And I love the way he worded it. He said, we might not think that that's something people should care about, but generally it doesn't work well telling people what they shouldn't care about. That generally doesn't work out well for you.
Yeah.
right?
So true.
And that's just true. And I'm going to say something, and part of me is embarrassed to say this, but part of me is not, because you kind of have to. You'll get this, Hillary, in admissions. But it just sort of shows the pressure. So I remember when I was on a trip to Washington, D.C. recruiting, and I was in a fairly hoity-toity neighborhood, and I was doing a reception. And 3 times people asked me, "What's your admit rate? What's your admit rate?" Like a different. And I knew what it meant. It meant, are you selective enough that I would want to send my kid to your school? And at the time, maybe we were maybe like 52%, admit rate. And I remember leaving there saying, this is going to sound bad, but I'm just going to be honest. We got to get our admit rate down.
Mm-hmm.
We got to get our admit rate down. So then you think, well, did you recruit to reject? The whole conversation of recruit. No, not intentionally, but I didn't mind going to places where I knew we were going to get hundreds of applications and it was going to make our admit rate lower, because to me, that was just going to help me to recruit better. I was going to be able to get a hearing from people that I may not get a hearing from.
Yeah.
And so to me, even if you got rid of some ranking, people are still going to just rank you anyway. And at the end of the day, people look for proxies for prestige and selectivity. And admit rate, to me, is used much more than a ranking. Most of people just kind of don't know what they might have looked at it, or they've looked at a few. They kind of you really don't even need to look at a ranking if you're a kid at a private school or a wealthy suburban school with a college going culture, because literally just by you mentioning schools, there'll be a calibration from peers and from everybody around you by how they react.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ooh, that's a good school. Ooh, never heard of it. And you'll end up getting a sense of where things are. This might seem like off topic, but hopefully it's not. So when I first came from Pennsylvania in 2009 to Atlanta, and I took a job at KIPP, I started out as director of high school placement. I was placing kids in boarding schools all over the country, and then I moved into director of college placement. But I remember when I first got there, so there had been this culture of all the top kids went to boarding school. So I was talking to a very, very, very high achieving student. And in fact, this student went to Phillips Exeter and then to Princeton. So Phillips Exeter is one of the creme de la cremes of the boarding schools, and Princeton, same thing, right? So, but this was when she was an 8th grader. And she's made a statement, and I never forgot it. And she's like, everybody knows what's up here. She's like, boarding schools are at the top, and then private day, and then magnet schools, and then your locally zoned public. That's just the way that it is, and everybody knows it. This is an 8th grader telling me this.
Yeah.
And I was like, how did she pick? That's not a ranking. That's not anything. That's not published. But she literally just, and by the way, she did accurately assess the culture. That was the culture at the time. The top kids would go to the boarding schools. Then the second ones, next tier would kind of go to private local day. Then you had magnet publics that you had to, you weren't automatically in. You had to have certain grades to get into them. And then there was zone public. She figured out that whole pecking order just from people's reaction. And that's kind of what people do, even if they don't look at rankings. So, and I do kind of feel that the zillions of rankings has kind of helped muddy the waters a little bit. I love it when Babson got ranked second by Forbes. I can show people why is it ranked second here and 171st over here? Yeah. And then I can make the point about, look, it's formula driven. Do you want to outsource your view of beauty to somebody else? So I will always continue to rail against the rankings, but I really find that what people really want is prestige and selectivity.
Yeah.
That's what they want. They want to go to a school that people think is a good school, and it has the imprimatur of being a good school, and they define it that way.
Yeah. I mean, I think that people use the rankings as a proxy for prestige, right? And one of the most interesting reactions that I saw this year when the U.S. News rankings came out, and that's U.S. News is really the big bad guy, right? When those came out, so my older daughter is a student at Wellesley. She's a senior, and immediately texted me and was like, "Mom, I don't believe it. Wellesley dropped in the rankings this year, and I think they dropped seventh of all of the liberal arts colleges in America, from maybe second or third, something like that. And she was beside herself, and so were all the other students at Wellesley. And I was like, okay, remember, we've talked about this. Like, what does that actually mean? Has anything changed? Is anything different for you in your experience now than it was your first year? Like, what do you think that's actually reflecting, and why does it matter? But I think it's really interesting to think about that audience, the audience of current students, the audience of young alumni, the audience of older alumni, the advancement audience, right? The giving, the folks who give. There are a lot of people in those groups who care a lot about using US News and World Report rankings as a proxy for prestige. And they believe, rightly or wrongly, that it might affect the jobs that they get or how people think of them personally, because that's the school that they graduated from. And so they get pretty amped up about it. And I think it's just really hard for even administrations that would like to stop cooperating or drop out, to manage the ways that those different audiences react.
Yeah, and board of trustees are notorious for caring a lot about it.
Yeah.
And people, are usually wise to not completely ignore what board of trustees think if you want to
totally
continue to
and
have
to
a
their
job.
credit, our board of trustees, CC is a different place, and our board of trustees are willing to do things a little bit differently, and they were very excited about the idea of dropping out. Like, it was actually more the admission office that said, okay, that's fine, but like, think about these other things also. Go clear-eyed into this decision. I don't think that our board of trustees is like most boards in that way, but ours were pretty enthusiastic about making the change.
Yeah, and it's always just good to educate people on just the complete subjectivity and the formula aspect of these things.
Yeah.
How that won't work for every single person. You can't just take one broad stroke of the brush and make it work for everybody. And how, quite honestly, they tweak the rankings. They tweak their formula virtually every year to sell more magazines. I mean, if you look at how the U.S. News formula has changed over the years, it's radically different than it. I mean, they've always kept this reputation score that was at the core of it, where they surveyed, presidents, provosts, deans, and asked them about their peer assessment. They've reduced it a little bit from like 25% to 17.5% or whatever. But over the years, like, they've counted things like SAT scores, then not counted them, counted acceptance rates and not counted them, alumni giving. I mean, on and on and on. They've really tweaked it all the time. Now, finally, they're starting to take a look at stuff related to socioeconomic diversity a little bit, and they are looking at how schools did with their Pell Grant recipients and did they have high graduation rates, and that's thrown the numbers off a lot. And so some of the schools, like the UCs that have more Pell students, like, they're shooting up higher. Some of the other schools are going down. One of the dilemmas for colleges, and you see it all the time, is they have a love-hate relationship with the rankings, right? Like, on one hand, they preach, oh, don't look at the rankings. They're completely subjective. Make your own decision. But then as soon as they're ranked high, you want to tout it because the public likes to hear that. And that's one of the problems Vanderbilt faced last year when they went ballistic because they dropped like a rock in the rankings, and after they'd been touting the rankings. Several people sent an article in yesterday, and actually yesterday, there's a big article in the New York Times. And we might even do it as an in the news. I don't know if you've read it yet, Hillary, but it talks about Ben Sasse, the president who used to be the Nebraska senator, who was the president of Florida, one of the highest paid presidents in the country. And he quit like almost immediately. And it had to do with the fact that the whole board, the whole entire school, had tailored everything to climb the rankings. And he didn't believe in that. And then the rankings, they went from 5th in Publix to 6th to 7th, and like all hell broke out on the campus.
Wow.
And he's like, why are we letting somebody else who we don't believe in their philosophy dictate to us what we do? And they tell us to jump, we say how high. One of the reasons why this became so controversial with the law schools is because what the law schools were doing is they were giving scholarships to high LSAT kids to climb the rankings,
Right.
And we know high LSAT kids are going to be families of means. So they were gutting all of their socioeconomic, racial, ethnic, rural diversity to go after families that, based on their background, where they're coming from, were going to score high. And the law schools were saying, you're decreasing the quality of our school to do it to chase rankings. And so it led to a little bit of a blowback there. But so that's an interesting thing. So yeah, we're probably going off on a tangent a little bit, but it's a fascinating conversation. We could talk about it forever. What should be our final words here for Becky?
I wish that we could say it's going to be different, but I don't think it is.
It's not going to change, so it's almost like not worth me losing a lot of sleep over. I will always take on the challenge of challenging people to put too much emphasis on the rankings. I will always do that.
I think that's the sort of call, right? Of
Yes.
People who know that the rankings aren't really reflective of overall quality or anything really special. It's really hard to differentiate between anyone who's in the top 25 of any of the rankings. I think the call is to make sure that when those conversations come up, that you're clear that like this is not how I see quality of school is not based on rankings alone. That might be part of it, but that can't be the only determination.
Yeah, I have a line I say a lot to families. Highly ranked schools are very good schools. It does not mean they're good for you or your kid.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, this conversation does not mean that we think all schools are equal either. Like there can be differences in schools based on resources and things. And so sometimes when you talk too much about this, people don't hear you because they're like, you cannot tell me that this school that's about to close is the same as this school over here. I just don't believe it. And then they tune you out.
Yeah.
So,
but I do think if you're looking at like cohorts of 25 or even 50 among the rankings, the differences, there are big differences among the schools in terms of who is the right fit for those schools. But the differences in quality of education and opportunity from those schools is not a big difference.
No, and also sometimes schools may be incredibly strong in a particular program that can trump all of that, of that. So we're not going to solve world peace. This is like asking us to solve world peace on this one, Becky, and that's not going to happen. I think it's a great question. I'm glad you brought it up. Hillary, it's fun talking to you about it, and you're the perfect school with you guys making the decision. Reed College, we should say, did this, I think, in 96 or a long time ago. There's a book written by their past president about it.
And they saw a drop in the rankings afterwards. We haven't experienced that yet. In fact, we went up, I think, 2 spots this year, but we're all sort of waiting to drop 30 spots in 1 year. We just are not sure how soon it's going to happen.
Now, let me ask you this, Hillary. How much would you say when the rankings come out, there's an awareness of it? Like someone's going to bring this up. Alumni, faculty, parents, prospective students.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if I've ever heard anyone bring it up at CC. I mean, I think we just don't attract.
Do you feel if you dropped, it would come up?
It would probably come up with our international students. I'm not sure that it would come up with our domestic students because we tend to attract the kinds of students. Like this is one of the things that's attractive about CC is that students who come to CC are looking to get out of the rat race, right? Like they're looking for a rigorous education without the sort of jostling for position. And so we already attract students who've discounted the importance of rankings to begin with. And so they're not the kinds of students who seem to care very much about it. And they've usually dragged their parents along with them in that. So it'd be really interesting to hear from someone who's at a different school where people care more about prestige. That's just not a thing that's like a big deal. That's one of the cool things about CC is that it's not a place where people care too much about that.
Now, I remember talking to Matt, director, and I don't want to misquote him here, but I asked him, and this was on one of our podcast interviews, he's been on a few times, like, would it matter if, CC dropped? And he did say it's important that we're at, I can't remember if it was like top 50 or top 30 or something like that. He does think if we fell too much out of that, there would be admissions ramifications. I don't want to quote him on
I think
number, but it's important that you stayed in a certain tier.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. And I could see our board of trustees and our faculty being a little shaken if there were a big drop. I mean, I think that some of them are already concerned that there will be a big drop. So there are certainly those conversations on campus, and perhaps it would affect, if we had a huge drop, it would affect our domestic pool. I don't think that incremental drops are going to affect our domestic pool. I mean, international is a big part of like how we pay our bills at CC,
Sure.
right? And so it is really important that we keep our international students, and rankings do matter to them.
And you'll still attract them. It's just, will you be able to yield the same kid, or will you have to,
Yeah. How does it change the quality?
Yeah. Yeah. That's really how it would show up. Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Hillary.
Yeah. Thank you.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, in part 2 of my interview with Rob Franek, the editor-in-chief at the Princeton Review, where we're looking at the topic of what can you learn from the surveys, the 168,000 surveys that Princeton Review does on hundreds of campuses every year. In part 2, Rob goes into a lot more detail into how they identify schools that they're going to select in the book. Rob also shares the fact that they will remove schools, and they do remove schools every year from the book. And we cover a wide range of a bunch of topics. I think you're going to enjoy it. Listen and enjoy. One question I've always been curious about is how you pick the 390 to begin with. I notice it goes up a couple every year. And I know people are angling and politicking and trying to say, hey, why am I not in this book? So what's the process of deciding who makes it and how you add additional schools? Because you're not surveying those other people, you survey, or maybe you are, I don't know, but
yeah. I spend a great deal of time, as I mentioned, on the road. I visit many schools that we have written about before that are already included in, let's say, the best 390 colleges. But I also visit schools that I've never written about before, and just to make sure that we're trying to cast a wide net, just to have a good cross section of schools, just in our in our thought process around this. So just in a nutshell, how we decide the number of schools that are going to go into the book. And, I do add schools each year, but I also remove schools each year. So although it looks like we only added one from the 2024 edition to the 25 edition, it was actually several schools that we had removed and added a couple more too. So, but yes, so I visit schools that I've written about before, and then we're trying to cast a wide net, keep a good cross section of different schools just in our universe, in our viewer. And then we reach out to between 40 and 50 schools each year, Mark. And then we ask them, and they have to kind of go through essentially a resume process with us. We've already now, it's already a curated list of schools. Then we ask them to tell us about any number of programs. One of them, you had mentioned already before, this idea of learning communities and experiential learning that has been a key for many of our students. So we want to be able to write about that and talk about those things, what makes that school different, how they talk about fit, how a university would discuss with the prospective student and their families, how they discuss fit from a career services perspective. Again, after graduation, what are they doing? What are the career resources? So it's any number of things. And then we, meet as an editorial team in the, let's call it late winter, early spring, to decide which of those schools we're going to be putting in the book. All of that time, we would, of course, be surveying their students to make sure that we have the window open for a long time.
And when you drop a school, is it because the surveys you're getting from the students sort of indicates, like, I'm not sure if this belongs in our top almost 400 compared to some of the other ones out there?
Yeah, it's a mixture of certainly our student survey and sentiment on student surveys do drive, our thought process in schools. And again, I have to rely on that rather than than my own opinion or my team's opinion for those things.
Sure.
So I always want to yield to the information that we're gleaning from current college students. But yes, that any number of things. And then, as you know, some schools, have difficulties. Some schools do change their,
sure.
Academic competitiveness, or, they, given the pandemic and given even the financial times from the FAFSA the finances. It's a struggle for many schools, and sometimes that would result in schools being removed from the book. I try to be judicious about that and removing few of them, but I do want schools to know that we add and remove schools each year.
Yeah, and I know 390 sounds like a big number, but NACAC, they said 2,275 accredited bachelor schools. So you're still talking about less than 1 in 5 being in this book, to make the book. And so there are other excellent schools that may not make it in.
Absolutely. And I try to, I do have a regional representation of some schools on our website, so they don't make it into the book, but we still have a lot of student survey information. So we do, other than, the best 390, there's another 300 or so schools that we do survey their students from, and we create that profile information on the website. So we do use that, again, from a student survey perspective, to think about those schools that we were considering for the next
Oh, you got like a little farm system there. Like, I've noticed good data. These under 300. That's helpful to know who to include. That's impressive. I didn't know about that.
Oh, sure. Yeah. It keeps us busy.
Let's talk about the 50 categories, because I think there's some people, a lot of our listeners will be familiar with the book. I don't know if all of them actually know. Some people probably just go right to the profiles and read the profiles of the schools they're interested in without looking at the methodology and realizing how different this is than other people that talk about rankings. Because when it says best 390 in people's mind, that's a ranking, right? Without realizing this is very, very different. So I think you've picked outstanding categories. Walk our listeners through, a chunk of the categories to whet their appetite that you have listed in the book by student survey. And then you've also grouped them, which I like, into broader categories like campus life. So talk a little bit about that, so our listeners will know like some of the kinds of things you're getting survey data on.
Absolutely. Yeah. So again, 50 ranking lists in all in the best 390 colleges, ranked in each of those lists from 1 to 25. Again, 100% based on student opinion from the survey that we've been talking about, and that we don't, as we had chatted about, this idea of hierarchical rankings. You won't see, the 1 to 390 or so on. So we don't do a one ranking list on overall competitiveness of a school, right? Because you can see that already from, just overall high school GPA. You can see how many students they're admitting from the top 25, 10% of their high school graduating class. You can see mean SAT and ACT scores. We have a lot of AP information as well. So you can get all that information, the quantitative data.
But you know what? I think even that is great, because if somebody wants to overly emphasize that, then they can overly emphasize that. But that's them imposing their own value system as to what they value in a college experience, as opposed to someone else that's maybe really big on some of the other factors that you also suss out.
Oh, Mark, 1,000%. And I'm so glad that you pointed that out, because the truth is, yes, you can curate those things by yourself. And I want to make sure that we're giving you the vernacular and the resources to do that. But I don't want to dictate to college-bound students and their parents, this is the only ranking list that you should look at. The idea of a hierarchical ranking list of the most competitive schools. We write about, in Best 390, I'm an outer borough kid here from New York City. We write about Brooklyn College and, of course, Hunter College, not too far from where I live, which are part of the City University of New York, the CUNY system. These are the mission for Brooklyn College is different from the mission of Harvard, but equally competitive students can go to both of them, and there's likely some cross-apps, certainly annually, for each of those schools. But I like the idea of having a true cross-section of schools, not only from a competitiveness perspective, but from any number of things. So might it be interesting for you, Mark, if you were a high school student, to know which school had the best classroom experience? Because we're asking those students this year, 168,000 of them, what are your professors like in the classroom? To me, this is incredibly of great and immediate value. If I were a high school student, I'd want to know, given what I like to hear in the classroom, I'd want to know that there's great classroom experience, that my professors are going to bring the material that they teach in life to life in the classroom, rather than to suck all of the life out of that material. And that is just a good indication of the kind of rankings that are, that are there. And I like that idea, from professor accessibility to, and not every one of these lists, Mark, has to be gratuitous, right? It can be professors get high marks and professors get low marks. And I'm not doing that.
I love that you do that, by the way. People want to know that too. Professors get high marks, professors get low marks. I love it.
Of course, like, to me, students, because this is 100% based on students, don't shoot the messenger here, but many schools, many of these colleges and universities have used their appearance on a ranking list that I'll say is less than coveted, sometimes from a media perspective and from a publicity perspective, to create some positive change on campus. And we've seen it over and over again with social ranking lists. For many years, I did a party school ranking list in the book, again, based on students' experiences at that school from a social life perspective. And schools use this for positive change. Financial aid, great, and financial aid, not so great. You probably pretty much don't want to be on the not so great list.
Sure.
And there are active things that are truly of value to students and their parents that are going to be valuable, and I think can change perception on campus. Again, we're only basing this on student opinion, so we have to factor that in.
I know I'm running the risk that this could bore people, but I really don't think it will. Blow through the list really quickly. I really want people to hear the different categories that Princeton Review. Remember, they've surveyed 168,000 people, average of 430 per campus. And I'll tell you something. As someone who's going in my 25th year doing this, when I look at your lists, it is spot on intuitively what I've come to know from doing this a lot. And I can look at that and say, you know what, that doesn't surprise me at all. That school made it. I mean, I'm almost never surprised by a school that you have, which is just, I know it's anecdotal, but that's one reason why I believe this is a great source. We're always preaching on our podcasting, talking to families about getting beyond the marketing, reading newspapers and doing things that really get to the culture of the school, talking with students, and on and on and on. Well, this is a tremendous way to get access to data from 170,000 surveys that gets beyond the marketing. But Rob, why don't you just blow through the list really quickly?
Sure.
You're a fast talker already. It won't take too long.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the mic coming. Yeah, no, this to me is and I totally 100% on what you just said, Mark. I'm so grateful that you're seeing this and that it feels spot on to you. And that's the same thing that I think about. I've been in the business a long time as well. That idea of how schools are representing themselves based on student opinion and what might not seem congruent to what we think, but happiest students, this might feel like a throwaway list, but it is anything but, right? So we are asking current students about their level of happiness. Auburn University, which it just bleeds school spirit. I mean, it's so valuable. And it might not be right for everybody, but then when we think about it, this is kind of the great stuff, so it's Auburn, KU, Kansas State, Taylor University, which is one of the newest schools that we put into the book just this past year, University of Dallas, Thomas Aquinas. I mean, these are great schools, best quality of life, Emory University, best college dorms, and dorms not so fancy, so again, we have some opposite sides of the spectrum list. We have a best campus food list, and then we have a campus food not so tasty list. Number one on our best campus food list now for the 7th year running is UMass Amherst, and University of Massachusetts Amherst. They are just the flagship, and they are essentially, I think they take it as onto themselves as being a teaching campus. That idea of teaching other schools how they've gotten to this spot of earning such accolades from their own students. Oh gosh, LGBT friendly as well as unfriendly, just thinking about acceptance of a queer community on campus. That would have been super important to me when I was looking at schools, but there was no such resource, right? So when we think about these things, there has to be utility for any number of students going through the college process to, again, give them confidence, give them the resources, and give them the ability to have conversation around these topics, any number of topics, so that they don't feel like they're taboo, that they can bring them up, so that they can make a best fit choice for the first time, truly a great choice for them the first time rather than have to transfer later on.
Rob, how do you recommend a parent or student use this resource? Let's say they're in the process of building a college list and they just want to make sure, that The schools, they're about to maybe buy some plane tickets, and geez, this is not cheap. We got 3 or 4 plane tickets, hotels, airfare, rent-a-car, meals. Like to kind of make sure we're not visiting a place that's completely, antithetical to what you're looking for. How do you recommend they use it?
Yeah, well, a couple of ways. If students are, and this will be the focus of my talk tomorrow night, I'm giving a talk in New Jersey. This idea of how do you synthesize down from 2,300 schools to 390 schools to the relative handful that you're going to get to visit over time. I love the idea of equipping yourself unapologetically with what students are saying on campus. So if a student is visiting Emory tomorrow, which I'm a big fan of Emory, but again, doesn't matter my opinion, but if they're visiting Emory tomorrow, then to read through what students are doing in the classroom at Emory, what they say about other students with whom they live and they study, talking about faculty and the academic experience at that school, and then about administrators and teams throughout the school and so on. This, to me, Mark, gives students, again, the comfort to say, you know what, I understand what students are saying about Emory, and it should then inform part of the conversation that you have when you're on campus. That, to me, is the best way to use this book. Now, if you just, and that's prior to your visits, but if you're taking a step back a year or a couple months before, I encourage all my students to think about 3 schools that you would love to see yourself at. Read about those 3 schools, and then in the sidebars for most of them, and if I can't fit it on the page, then I put it online. If a student is looking at Georgia Tech, then they're likely to consider these other schools. They're likely to cross-app with these other schools, and students may choose this other school over Georgia Tech. So it just, again, in a metered approach, Mark, widens the lens for students to start to really grow in their comfort level from this school to this school to this school, and now they have a working vernacular around it.
Rob, you're hitting it close home to me. So you've the last 2-3 minutes you've mentioned Auburn, Emory, and Georgia Tech. I live 70 miles from Auburn, 30 miles from Emory, and 20 miles from Georgia Tech. So you hit up some of the local ones. but I'll tell you, I had a conversation with a student I'm working with in Colorado, and she's applied ED to Vanderbilt, and I was telling her, there's a resource I want you to understand. So it's your book, right? And your website. So we spent 20-25 minutes on a Zoom call. I went in, I pulled up all this stuff. She was very interested, right? And you know this, you have 4-year schools where you can search for the school, and then it pulls up all the categories where it made the top 25 list.
Oh yeah.
And I was reading them all off for Emory, and I mean for Vanderbilt, and she was loving it, and she's on her way to pick the book up as soon as we got off the call, by the way.
So
yeah but just so that's how I'm using it in my counseling, is letting people really understand this is data, and it's one piece, it's not the whole piece, and you would be the first to say it's not the whole piece, right? Other things like visits and websites and talking with people, all those things matter, but it's one way where you can get behind the marketing and get to the culture, and I think that's one of the best things that you can do out here, and it's what families are looking for.
Oh gosh, I love it, and I'm right there with you. And that idea of getting to the identity of the campus culture, as you say it so nicely, that to me, yes, is the value of this book, and it is what students and their parents want, right? I mean, to be given those things rather than perception and brand, or perception of brand, and Vanderbilt. 6% of students got in last year. I mean, we have to keep that in our noggins, right? There's a quantitative formula here, but will a student be satisfied? Would they find fit in Vanderbilt? And that, to me, is what you're talking about with your own counselees. Yeah.
Friends, this concludes part 2 of 3 of my interview with Rob Franek, editor-in-chief of the Princeton Review. We hope you join us next week for the final part.
And now it's time for our college spotlight of the week.
Friends, over the next 4 weeks, you're going to hear a series from Kevin Newton, our international specialist, looking at what universities are safe to attend overseas. And he defines safe very broadly. And so I hope you enjoy part 1. Hey, friends, Kevin Newton's back. Hi, Kev.
Hey, Mark, how are you doing?
I'm pretty psyched. I'm in the Outer Banks. In
Yeah, happy late
beach.
birthday, Mark.
Thank you. Yeah, here with family. And, it's nice. You can get these really nice big houses here all together. It's like 7 bedrooms, 6 baths, overlooking water. It's really nice.
And
We're
some of
here
the
with
best
family.
donuts around, too. I'm just going to
Yeah,
throw that
yeah.
again.
Nothing like family. And the nice thing is, my birthday is close to Thanksgiving. So like people get the double incentive. Like we can celebrate your birthday and do Thanksgiving and do 2 for 1. So we got a little bit of a tradition here. We're going to try to keep it going, and I'm enjoying life. Thanks for asking. So friends, Kev reached out to me with what I thought was a great idea. He said, why don't we do, a college spotlight on safe colleges abroad? And, I have so much respect for Kevin that I really didn't even need to ask him what he wanted to talk about. I just know it's going to be good. And that's partly because my judgment is good, but it's also partly because your judgment. The feedback we get from his sessions about international schools is off the chart. And so I like to have him back, every 3 months to talk about international schools. So, Kev, I'm going to let you talk about what you want to talk about, and I'm going to let you talk about what you mean by safety. If it was somebody else, I would have pre-screened you with all kinds of things ahead of time, but I trust you so much that I know it's going to be good. So take it where you want to go.
Well, thank you, Mark. And, I think what really kind of got the gears turning was I listened to your recent episode where you talked about the election. And I don't want to rehash that because, you and I are good enough friends that we know, I see the world quite similarly as you do. Despite the vestiges of a Southern accent and the fact that I'm, sitting
Tennessee
here
roots, Tennessee to
my
Texas.
Tennessee roots, but whether or not, you are celebrating the results or whether you're mourning the results or whether you're utterly indifferent to the results, the fact of the matter is there are some people in this country who are hurting and who are afraid. And there are, even beyond the election, I think it's a fair question to talk about safety overseas. The world we live in is quite dangerous. We have what some people would call a special military operation. I call it full-on war happening in Europe. It's our first ground war in Europe since the 1940s. First substantial ground war. Obviously, there was the Balkan conflict and other tragedies. We have an increasingly bellicose China with regards to its 9-dash line in the South China Sea. I'm telling you, Mark, this is my past life of discussing political risk here. I'm loving this.
Yeah, but it's good because I'm always interested in a comprehensive assessment of things, and safety is a lot of things, right? And
Yeah.
that component of it is important. And who better than you to let us know what parts of the world you might want to avoid right now, and
right.
That, and I just like your comprehensive definition of safety. One thing I will say, I knew, one of the things I realized right away after the election, I'm like, oh my goodness, is Kevin going to be able to handle his volume of work?
It changed some plans, but it's not, you want people to come because they're excited about about the prospect of going overseas. You don't want, it's something I've really been strongly felt about. And, the funny thing is I've got my list here of things to talk about. We didn't even get to the global political situation in the Middle East right now, which is, my big area of interest. Like, if y'all think Mark and I can go on for hours and hours about college admissions, you have not had the misfortune of sitting around the dinner table when I get started on the Middle East. It is
Well, I just look at even where you got your degree in, like you're interested in this stuff,
like it's fascinating. I'll keep us between the buoys though, and
Sure.
Also there's something to be said about crime. We factor that in when we're talking about universities here in the U.S. Some people,
Sure.
There is a notion that, and I'm not going to, I honestly don't know because Mark, you're the expert on domestic universities, not me. Is some people will take a look at, say, Yale and be like, well, the crime rate around New Haven, or, you're saying this, Mark, as you're wearing a Rhodes College T-shirt. which, I have some great friends who went to Rhodes, and it's, parts of Memphis can be a little dodgy, depending on who you ask. And, it's all
Yeah,
about
fortunately,
personal.
Rhodes is in a safer section. One thing that's nice as a college counselor, you go to a lot of these counselor fly-in programs and you end up with all kinds of merch. So I'll tell you, quick story. I was just at UNC Wilmington, and I started to go in UNC Wilmington. I'm going in. I started grabbing my coat. I was grabbing a jacket that Richmond sent me from a flying program from you. I said, it's kind of not cool to wear,
Right.
to wear it at another school. So I threw it back in the car, and then I grabbed a different one, and it was Willamette. And I was thinking, Willamette, small little school, Salem, Oregon. Nobody's gonna know what it is. And then the tour guide says, "Is that Willamette University in Salem, Oregon? Are you wearing that shirt?" I was like, "Are you kidding me?" No, she came back and said, "Well, my good friend is there," and she even pronounced it right. So you got to be careful. But I kind of always have a freebie on that some college gave me. Today it's Rhodes. But anyway, getting off track. Sorry, let me let you get back to your safety
No, you're
topic.
fine. So I kind of want to tackle these from the probably easiest to hardest. And first, it's the crime factor.
Yep.
Again, without going too political, the United States has more permissive personal defense laws than a lot of other westernized or modernized countries. You can own a gun to go fox hunting in England. You can own, a gun if you're in Australia for certain circumstances. Here in Texas, I'm pretty sure we hand them out at the Welcome Center. So, it's a cultural thing. I don't want to go into the weeds of it because I have some very strong feelings about it, but it is something that, a lot of my students, when they're going to their safety orientation meetings in London, they are shocked to find out that there's a focus on avoiding knife crime and how low the rates are. I remember I had one student who came back and was just like, "Am I in the Twilight Zone? Like, did I really just set through a 45-minute lecture on how to keep myself safe from knife crime when, he's like, I come from," I won't say which state, but he's like, "I come from a state where, in a high school, where I'm pretty sure there was more than one gun on campus at any given time. We had."
I've never told you this, Kevin, but you knew I grew up in Canada, but it was in a smaller town part of Canada. I never ever saw anybody with a gun. I lived in a town where cops didn't have guns. Cops. No. So, it was an adjustment. I came over to, here in the 80s, and I'm seeing like just your typical security person has a gun. Everybody's running. It was, now I'm used to it because I've been here for over 40 years, but I remember that personal shock. And I also remember as a kid doing research and seeing places like Tokyo had like 2 gun murders for the year, right? And that, but you bring up something really important. Safety is very, very important to people, which there's no surprise about that, right? I was listening to that talk show host, Charlemagne the God, and he made a pretty profound statement I've been thinking about a lot. He's like, I can tell you people basically want 2 things. They want safety and they want their financial state in life to improve. And that's a little bit of an oversimplification because some people care deeply about philanthropy and the society that we're in. But I think he's pretty spot on for 2 core basic needs. Now, what I will tell you as a college counselor, and you kind of really were right spot on with this, what people regard as safe is very different from one person to the next. Our regular listeners have heard me talk about we use a 170 question questionnaire. It's very detailed to figure out what a families want. And sometimes I'll have a family that I'm not going anywhere. My kid is not going anywhere with permissive gun laws. And they feel very strongly about it. And so I know, okay, these are the places that, I can't recommend. I'll have people go, like a really good litmus test for me is UC Berkeley. I'll have people go to UC Berkeley and it freaks them out. This is not safe. and then I'll have somebody else go to UC Berkeley and they'll be like, I love it. People have different reactions based on homelessness. If they encounter some people, if they encounter a homeless person, that place is toast. Other people are like, I see homeless people like every week, and I
Right.
ride public transportation. So this is a total beauty's in the eye of the beholder, but you just have to listen to people and see what safety means to them. Another good litmus test is temple. Boy, some people react strongly against temple. Some people are like, are you kidding me? What's the hype over temple? Anyway, let me stop talking and let you talk.
No. I think you're absolutely right. It's I know I've got a tendency, and again, I'm coming from a certain amount of privilege. I am not a small individual. I can be physically imposing sometimes. I don't know to whom, but the accusation has. There have been times where Kate, my wife, has looked at me and said, "Just don't talk. Just look fierce." And I'm like, I don't know how to do that. But it's not just weapons. It's also we get into things like cultural questions. How there are certain countries that harassment is a bit of a bigger thing. Again, I'm very quick to recognize my privilege as a straight white guy, that there are places that might not be as opening if I were a person of color, a woman, a member of the LGBTQ community. Now, luckily, the places that most individuals that I work with are interested in, I think most people who are thinking of going abroad, you're not going to run afoul of that more than you would here in the U.S. The UK has had some questions about specifically trans individuals that they're working out as a society. Do I think that if you're a trans individual that you should write the UK off if you're looking at places that are not, say, the United States? No, I think you should just be cognizant of the fact that those discussions are going on, and this is something to be aware of. There's a stereotype to some degree that certain Southern European cultures tend to be a little misogynistic. If I were a woman, would I necessarily write off Italy? No. I have female students in places like Milan and Rome and Barcelona who are having the time of their lives. It's just something that, I would kind of look at with regards to what am I comfortable with personally.
So, Kev, can we get even more concrete and concretize this from the standpoint of, can we talk about colleges or universities that either, if this is your concern, you may not look here, or if this is your concern, you may look here? Because I think I can see some listeners thinking, everything you say I agree with. Get to the bottom line. Like, where should I avoid, or where should I go?
I think, and I hope everyone will forgive me, but just because we've got a number of different ideas of safety overseas to cover, and I don't want to get bogged down in this one, is if you're looking for more open societies, where if you're a woman, a person of color, a member of the LGBTQ community, you're going to be more readily accepted, and not just accepted, but embraced. Because we don't want to be accepted. We want to be, we want people to be embraced.
Mm-hmm.
You definitely are looking at places like Scandinavia. You're looking at Ireland. You're looking at the Netherlands. I think I feel pretty comfortable the larger cities in those countries saying, if you're looking at a university that's of some global reputation, we don't want to play the prestige game here, but you're going to find your people. There's always the chance you're going to find some jerk as well.
Friends, this concludes part 1 of 4 of the series that Kevin is doing for us on safe universities overseas. We hope you join us next week for part 2. Friends, on Monday's episode, Julie and I have been talking quite a bit lately about just a missed opportunity that we are seeing and observing in student essays that we're reading. And we want to share that with you so your student doesn't miss out on a very important opportunity for admission officers to hear the student voice in a way that will resonate with the admission officers. So you'll hear that, and then you'll hear the final part of my interview with Christoph Gutentag, Dean of Admissions at Duke University, on understanding Duke University. Friends, I close with a quote from Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, great innovator, founder of Apple, largely responsible for Apple's success and all the innovation and the products that Apple produced until, unfortunately, Cancer caught him at a really young age, and he's not with us anymore. But here's what Jobs said. Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Did you catch that? Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.